Hi, today we're going to walk you through how to balance a draft beer system. This is a system like you'd find in a home kegerator. While it's essentially the same process for commercial installations, today we're going to focus on home systems. Do you find it difficult to get a perfect pour every time? If so, this is probably the perfect video for you. So many people just hook up kegerators and expect it to work without giving any thought to balancing their system. We're gonna walk you through what balancing is, and we'll help you to understand all of the concepts involved with it, and then we'll walk you through step by step how you can balance a draft system. So hopefully when you come out of watching this video, you'll be able to properly understand how to balance a draft system, even if you hate math. So let's get started. Cheers.
First, a quick overview. Let's start by having a look at a basic draft system. We have a gas bottle and regulator that goes to a keg, and then a beer line that runs from our keg to our beer tap or font. Some of the variables we're going to need to have a look at are temperature of the beer, the desired carbonation volume, which is how bubbly the beer is, the gas regulator pressure, beer line diameter, the height of the beer tap above the halfway height of the keg, and the total length of the beer line. We're going to break this into two topics, the first of which is proper carbonation, and the second is proper pouring. Let's have a look at how some of these variables will impact the balance in a keg system. Let's assume this system's balanced. We pour a beer and we get a perfect pour every time. Although, what would happen if we were to change, for instance, the length of our beer lines? Let's run a longer beer line to our font and see what impact this has on our pour. Now, there's more resistance in a longer line, so when we pour a beer, it comes out slow and flat. We can compensate for this in one of a couple of ways. We can increase the pressure on our regulator to say 15 pounds and then pour a beer and it comes out nicely. Of course, over time, this higher pressure is going to have the undesired result of increasing the carbonation of our beer. Alternatively, we could leave our pressure back at the 12 pounds it was before, and we could increase the diameter of our beer line in order to reduce the resistance in the system. Now with a larger diameter beer line, if we pour a beer, it also pours perfectly. Now let's look at what happens if we shorten the beer line. We can pour a beer, and it's going to be too foamy. This is because there's not enough resistance in the beer line. Again, we can compensate for this, and we could reduce the pressure on our regulator, let's say to 5 psi, and then pour another beer. And it comes out perfectly. But in the long term, this reduced pressure on our keg is going to cause our beer to go flat. Now let's look at maintaining proper carbonation. Let's start with the temperature of your keg fridge or cool room where your kegs are stored. This is probably 4 degrees C, that's the industry standard for beer, but you might choose to have it a degree or two cooler. Once we pick a value, we need to keep it fixed and not change it. I'm going to work with 4 degrees Celsius. If you don't have a good temperature controller on your fridge, you can put a glass of water in your kegerator for a couple of hours and then test the water temperature if you want to be sure. If you don't know what temperature to use, then just use 4 degrees C. While we're talking about temperature, you really have to ensure that if your beer lines leave your fridge or cool room, like up into a font or something like that, they need to be really well insulated or chilled by glycol or something all the way to your tap. Otherwise, that warmer temperature in your beer line is going to cause you problems. Next, we need to look at your desired carbonation volume. In simple terms, you can think of carbonation volume as how bubbly your beer is. A higher carbonation volume means more gas is dissolved in your beer. Carbonation volume varies from style to style. For instance, a lager will generally have a much higher carbonation volume than a stout. It's measured in volumes of CO2, which is a measure of how much carbon dioxide is dissolved into the beer. 1 volume of CO2 means that every litre of beer contains 1 litre of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide dissolves into liquid much easier at lower temperatures. This is why it was so critical to work out the temperature our kegerator is running at. In homebrew terms, carbonation volume for a particular beer style is its whole own topic. If you haven't delved into this topic yet, work on 2 to 2.6 volumes of CO2 for your homebrew. Most Australian commercial beers are around 2.5 volumes of CO2. If you're a homebrewer who hasn't learnt about carbonation volumes yet, then 2.5 is a good starting point for you too. Keep in mind that because carbonation volume varies from style to style, in a kegerator that has multiple kegs, you may want to run different kegs at different pressures. This really matters because later it's going to make a difference to your line lengths on different taps. Now that we've worked out our beer temperature and desired carbonation volume, we can determine what pressure to set our gas regulator to. To do this, we can have a look at a carbonation chart. I'll add a link to one of these carbonation charts in the video comments. And we start by running down the left-hand column until we find our set temperature. And then we run across this row until we find the value that lines up best with our carbonation volume. Then draw a line up to the top, and there's our set pressure. 12 psi in the case of my example. So this set pressure is the pressure required to hold the carbonation level in the beer without adding any additional CO2 at this temperature or allowing the CO2 to leave the beer over time. Now that we've worked out temperature, carbonation volumes and regulator set pressure, it's time to look at our beer lines. The first thing we need to consider is the diameter of our lines. Our beer line will create resistance against the flow of beer, and that resistance will vary depending on the diameter of the line. We're going to measure this resistance in psi per foot. Look up your beer line diameter on the table on the screen now and determine the resistance. Most home draft systems would use 1/4 inch or smaller unless you have a very long run. I suggest starting with 3/16 or 1/4 inch line and adjusting from there if your run is too short or too long in the coming steps. Once you have your beer line resistance in psi per foot, write it down because you're going to need it later. If we're going to properly balance our draft system, we can't forget about gravity. So next we need to look at the height of our tap above our keg. We're going to measure this in feet, and we want to measure from the halfway height of the keg. Because as the keg gets used and the liquid level goes down, this means that you're working on a height that is close to right most of the time. If you'd work from the top of the keg, the end of your keg would pour slow with less head, and if you were to work from the height at the bottom of your keg, the first few pints from the keg will be flowing way too hard and foam a lot more. For most kegerator systems, this height will be about 2 feet, and keysers will be closer to 1 foot. Once you have the height of your tap, write that down, and remember to use feet. Now we can calculate the length of our beer lines to give us our desired pressure at the tap. The steps are: take your gas regulator pressure, subtract 1 psi. This is the delivery pressure that you want at the tap to get a perfect 60 ml per second flow rate. Subtract half of the tap height in feet. For example, if your tap height is 2 feet, then subtract 1. Take the number you have now, divide it by the line resistance in psi per foot for your chosen beer line diameter. The number you're left with is how many feet long your beer line should be. For those who like math, this can be expressed with the following formula. Now let's work through my example. We start with the gas regulator pressure, which was 12 psi. Subtract the delivery pressure of 1 psi. This leaves us with 11 psi. Now we subtract half of our tap height, which in my case is 1 psi. This leaves us with 10 psi. Now we divide that 10 psi by the line resistance, and because I'm using 316 line, that's 2.2 psi per foot, which leaves us with 4.5 feet as the final line length.
So I hope this video has helped you to understand how to properly balance a draft system. If you're building a kegerator and this has helped, let me know down there in the comments. And if you've already got a kegerator, maybe try running through these numbers on your system and let me know how you go again down there in the comments. I'd like to ask you all, please subscribe so I can keep making videos like this. It's a lot of fun, but without the support, we can't keep doing it. Again, if it was helpful or you found it interesting, please share it with a friend. Cheers, till next time.